Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today is day 78 in the ongoing war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And today we're going to start out our coverage down by Snake Island. As we know, this area is continuing to be contested. Right now, it looks as if there could be Russian forces still on the island. We do know that over the last several days, just prior to the Russian May Day celebration, Victory Day, the Ukrainian forces may have attempted to launch a special operation to seize control of the island. It does not appear that operation was successful. Now, with that being said, it does appear that the Ukrainians have done a very good job at really tying down Russian forces and striking out at Russian forces on this island. We can confirm through video evidence that Ukrainian drones have struck the island and targets around the island, to include obviously ships and helicopters that have landed on the island a multitude of times. And I think at this point the Russians are weighing the cost benefit of still trying to keep forces on that island. We also know that as reported many days ago about the Russian frigate, the more modern frigate that may have been hit, that appears to not have occurred. And obviously this is older news, but this gives you an idea of the continued operations by both forces that are continuing for Snake Island. And at this point, while it could be beneficial to Russian forces to at some point put long-range air defense systems on the island, quite possible anti-ship missile systems as well that could be directed against NATO forces, especially near Romania, and also serve as a more or less a floating weapons depot for possible use of other weapon systems as well. But we do know that these Ukrainian drones are continuing to operate. The Russians have been able to shoot some down, but the Ukrainians continue to fly some of these drones within the vicinity of Snake Island and launch some long-range precision-guided missile attacks, especially with some of those MAM-Ls that are on the TB2 Bayraktar drone. In other news, we continue to see Ukrainian forces continuing to pressure the Russian army to the north, central, and south of Kharkiv. And it looks like right now that the Russians are incredibly concerned about this ongoing offensive that is taking place. And we know that Russia has had to deploy some of its forces near Izum towards the ongoing offensive by Ukrainian forces near Kharkiv, and it has taken some battalion tactical groups that would be deployed in this ongoing offensive in the Donbass and redeploying those forces towards Kharkiv. Now, what could be the Ukrainian goal at this point? Is it a drive to quite possibly shore up all areas along the Russian border, and then quite possibly to launch an operation to threaten Belgorod? I would not rule that out at this point. I do not believe that you can do that, given the fact that the Ukrainian military, has had the ability to push Russian forces back from Kharkiv. And the possibility that we could see Ukrainian forces cross into Russia proper. We've already seen Ukrainian artillery strikes on Russian villages that have led to the death of several individuals. But Could that be eventually a Ukrainian goal? Is to try to push into Russia proper and threaten Belgorod? Unsure at this point. We'll have to watch and see what happens, and if in fact the Russians are able to slow this offensive down and start to drive it back. That seems to be their intent right now. The other opportunity for the Ukrainians is once they have the ability to place a holding force along the area to the northwest of Kharkiv, we could see the Ukrainian offensive start to press down in a southeasterly direction, looking to cut off and threaten the ongoing Russian offensive in the Donbass in the direction of Severodonetsk and especially Kramatorsk and Izium. At this point, it's difficult to say what the ultimate Ukrainian intent will be. I would say that in all probability it will be more of an operation once, if the Ukrainians are able to secure these areas to the east of and north of Kharkiv. I believe at that point we could see, if the Ukrainians continue to be successful, a drive in this kind of this southeasterly direction designed to pull Russian forces, away from the Donbass region, and then look to create an environment of a perceived stalemate for Russian forces and Ukrainian forces in the ongoing conflict. And that would inherently lead to a de facto loss for the Russian Federation. And again, I base that on war aims and war goals of the Russian Federation, and I believe that right now that war aim and war goal is still the securing of all territory east of the Dnieper River. I just don't envision that if hostilities cease, how the current status quo in terms of areas being held by Russian forces, how that could be construed as a victory. I understand that they would still have the issue of delivering water to the Crimea. That could be one benefit of this operation. But the cost of the operation versus what has been gained, that cost still outweighs significantly, in all probability, what has been gained. And then future facing, the Ukrainian military is going to rearm and in all probability attempt to seek NATO membership. Now that's going to be difficult given the situation on the ground and the relationship between Ukraine and Russia, and per policy of NATO, a nation in current armed conflict cannot be a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, will they modify that rule for the Ukrainians? Again, difficult to say at this point. But for the Russians, I firmly believe that no less than all territory east of the Dnieper River is something that they would be willing to walk away from this conflict with, and that would be it. I think walking away with what they have now in terms of Russia would basically pause the conflict, and we then could see the Ukrainians rearm, refit. And obviously, they're getting a steady flow of Western armaments into the country with this $40 billion arms package. And then next on the list would be quite possibly rebuilding the Ukrainian Air Force and making it a very significant power for the region. That's Russia's worst case scenario and where Ukraine could be heading, and that's why, in all probability, the Russians are not going to stop the ongoing conflict until those worst case war goals, war aims were in fact achieved. Also, the question has come up, is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the United States, are there actual high-ranking members of NATO and or retired members of Western powers actively organizing and advising, and in some cases leading the Ukrainian war effort. And I would say at this point that's a very, very high probability. If we go back to the Yugoslav wars, where Croatia launched Operation Flash and Operation Storm back in the 90s. Those forces were directly led, and a lot of the strategy and implementation of that giant, that large Croatian offensive that really hurt the Bosnian Serbs significantly, and even the regular Serb Yugoslav army as well. There were retired U.S. generals on the ground helping the Croats orchestrate both Operation Flash and then obviously the larger Operation Storm that took place. And in all likelihood, that same methodology is being utilized. I would not be surprised if there are retired general officers that are on the ground right now in Kiev or in Lviv, and again orchestrating this continued war effort and assisting the Ukrainians with both ascertaining intelligence, articulating that intelligence, and then developing strategic plans to prosecute the war effort in terms of what they believe would be the best for Ukrainian forces to win the war. And in all probability, this offensive right now that we're seeing in Kharkiv probably resonates, probably started with Western assistance, and that is taking place. And I think at this point, as I've talked about before, really risks the possibility of escalation. This war has been going on for some time, and Western media and the Western population, especially in the United States, tends to move on to other things and does not really see what is happening as something that really could threaten their lives. But unfortunately, this is how world wars start. No one believes it can happen, but eventually it does. And in this case, the possibility that it could occur, I mean, the expanding the conflict is very, very possible. Probably more possible now than at the beginning of the conflict. And unfortunately, Western attention span in terms of what is being messaged out of the Kremlin, they could construe it as the Kremlin crying wolf. It's difficult to say, but ultimately they could misjudge the Kremlin stance on what it's actually willing to do in regards to Ukraine. And I think that's where the miscalculation could take place, and we could find ourselves in a much broader and expansive conflict. Also, there's been some comments in the comment section discussing about Russian losses. It's difficult to say what is real. Obviously, some of the Ukrainian reports that are coming out in terms of their reporting on Russian losses have to be inflated. Some of the reports that come out are just so over the top in terms of Russian losses. Have the Russians taken losses? Yes, but at the same time, the Ukrainians don't really report their losses at all as well, and that's just part of their propaganda methodology. But the idea that Russia can't produce tanks and the Russians have difficulty supplying its forces, I would caution the viewer with that thought process. Look, the Russians have China. China would absolutely assist and help Russia with needed material. The Chinese make their own tanks. The Chinese have the ability to make relatively good optics on their own. Obviously not to some of the Western standards, and these are the instruments that the Russians would absolutely need in terms of that high-tech capacity to help them produce some of these devices that are needed in terms of some of the higher end equipment maybe T-72B3s, upgraded T-90Ms, what have you, repairing some of these vehicles. That assistance is going to come from China, and I don't believe that at this point Russia is in a situation where it cannot produce main battle tanks. There may be some deficiencies, but ultimately they should be able to produce equipment for their military, and I don't think the situation is dire as is being reported. Now, look, Western intelligence has been spot on in some things, and they've been way off in other areas. And one of those areas was, how proficient the Russian army would be in seizing control of Ukraine, possibly seizing control of Kiev. We have seen, obviously the talking heads were talking about 72 hours, and they were all wrong. However, I got to toot my horn. Not at this channel. We predicted that it would be a slog for the Russians, and I don't believe the problems that the Russians are facing is due to Russian incompetence. A lot of what we're seeing on the ground is because of the proficiency of the Ukrainian military directly being supported by Western nations. This is an incredible military challenge, and I've talked about this before, and the Ukrainian military is fully mobilizing, and this is not an easy task for any military. So to say that because Russia is having challenges, and great challenges at that, in regards to this ongoing fight, does that mean the entire Russian military is incompetent? No, I do not believe that. I think you're seeing a modern war with two industrialized powers, and one of those industrialized powers, meaning Ukraine, is being directly supported in a proxy war by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the United States. And inherently, that is going to create a different outcome if the NATO and the United States were not involved in the ongoing conflict. But it's twofold. It's that support that they're getting, and at the same time, the proficiency of the Ukrainian military. It is a decent force that has a wide range of capability, and it's proving that. And I don't think you can just say, oh, the Russians just suck and they're bad and they're incompetent. I don't think that's the case. Yes, are there issues within the Russian military? Absolutely, there is. But this is a very challenging mission that the Russian armed forces have been tasked with in terms of some of these operational goals, and quite possibly some poor decision making at the highest levels were made, especially in terms of going after Kiev the way they did. I think that should have been done a different way, and I think the long-term outcome may in fact have been much different if they did not expend a lot of those forces north and northwest of Kiev. But that's already that's done. But right now, we're just going to continue to watch what happens in the Kramatorsk-Sloviansk-Severodonetsk pocket. Russians continue operations to squeeze and envelop that area. And then obviously we're watching very, very closely this Ukrainian counteroffensive, and could it escalate the conflict into a wider war with NATO. Hard to say at this point, but again, we will continue to monitor the report and bring you content for your consumption. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.